When Alice Walker won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1983 for her poignant novel, The Color Purple, she surely did not imagine the impact her remarkable book would have on American culture. Nor could she have realized how her words, along with those of several other African-American women, would capture the attention and moral imagination of mainstream America over the next 2 decades. The works of these lyrical African-American women shattered gender, class, and racial barriers to enthrall, enchant, and enlighten millions. Their reflections on spirituality, feminism, family, friendship, social injustice, poverty, and politics articulate the hopes, dreams, and philosophies of many readers who, on the surface, may seem to have little in common with the writers. Yet these women, novelists, essayists, poets, and songwriters, have stirred souls and ignited conversations. In this program, we'll examine the emergence of the African-American woman as a popular and powerful voice of America's social conscience. This is today's Life Choices, Challenges for Our Times. Alice Walker grew up in the South in the 50s and participated in the civil rights movement of the 60s. Those experiences profoundly shaped her life, and the quest for freedom is often a major theme of her writings.
I think that African American women, in a sense, have nothing to lose. I think that we have been down as far as anybody can go, and there's nowhere else to go but up. And I think that there is a way in which we have seen through so much of the culture and we're not impressed, and that we feel no fear or, much caring, really, I think, about, who approves and who does not approve. It's not important. I mean, we know it isn't. I mean, we've been here for all these years and we've really seen a lot about what is real, what is authentic, who is really honest, who is really caring, what is really meaningful. These are some of the gifts of being enslaved. There are really gifts in that, believe it or not.
Throughout the history of the United States, African American women have written about issues that reflected the struggles of their era. Many of these works, such as Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin and Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman, have withstood the test of time. But those women were rare voices in a literary world dominated by white men. Today's environment has given rise to a plethora of writers with a diversity of backgrounds and opinions. Works by African American women complete an entire section in most local bookstores and frequently dot the bestseller lists. Dr. Martha Wharton is an assistant professor in the departments of African American and Women's Studies at Ohio State University.
African American women have been writing fiction based on their American experiences for centuries. But this more contemporary wave comes out of the Black Arts movement. It comes out of the feminist movement of the 60s and 70s, in that iteration of it. And to bring together African American lit and ideas about African American community, women's community, and to have a voice different from the male African American voice that articulates a different type of experience is, I think, what makes these books popular and really got a wave started.
As with any cultural trend, it's difficult, if not impossible, to pinpoint exactly when the popularity of the works of African American women began to gain momentum. Writers such as Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and Zora Neale Hurston certainly were well known and well respected in academic and literary circles, but their exposure to mass audiences was somewhat limited. What helped bring attention to the writings of African American women was the unparalleled success of Walker's novel, The Color Purple.
For the next 8 or 10 months.
And subsequently, its critically acclaimed film adaptation. Together, the book and the movie reached millions of people who perhaps had never read or examined the thoughts of an African American writer. Although the characters in the book and film are African American, the storyline transcends race. Readers of every age, sex, religion, and ethnic background could identify with its themes of domestic violence, complicated family relationships, friendship, hope, trust, and redemption.
I think that there is, in the spirit of the women in that novel and then in the movie, it really helped women to see these women in the movie, because you could see that there is just this impulse to be free. And in our culture, we often thought that it was all about just being free from white people. But what you see in the book and in the movie is that it's about freedom, period. You know, just because someone who oppresses you looks like you doesn't make it any happier. It's still oppression. And so, yes, I think that women and the men who could see themselves, you know, in all of the characters, felt this great encouragement to be free of oppression, no matter who is dealing it.
After the success of The Color Purple, readers began to enthusiastically embrace the works of African American women. Valerie Lee, a professor of English at Ohio State University, says readers have been rewarded by the wealth of enriching literature.
I think that the American public has been so interested in African American women writers simply because they write so well. Their writing has energy, they give us characters who are resilient, and they write stories that are very deep. That is, they write stories that ask very hard questions, and then they give complex answers to those questions. So it's everything you could want with a reading experience.
Bell Hooks, a distinguished professor in the English department at City College in New York, published her first book at 19. Her best-known works are her books Bone Black and Teaching to Transgress.
We're captivated by the writings of African American women because the issues raised in a lot of this work speak to the heart of where many people feel they are in our lives. A lot of the issues raised have to do with pain, how we deal with pain, how we overcome hardship, how we imagine new worlds for ourselves. And that's part of why the writing by African American women that people seek out is so strong and so desired in our society right now.
In the past, African American writers, particularly women writers, were not published as frequently as their white counterparts, and the books that did make it to print certainly did not receive the media attention or publicity that is now available to authors. Sophisticated marketing, exposure, and promotion have helped African American women tell and sell their stories. But more importantly, the civil rights and women's movements opened doors that were previously slammed shut.
I don't think we could have had the same type of explosion 30, 40, 50 years ago. Publishers had to change their minds. Many publishers would not have considered a text by an African American writer, and certainly not by an African American woman. For the longest time, African American literature was allowed to have Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, no one else. So something had to change with racial politics, but something had to change with gender politics too, such that one could have this many women writing. Certainly the civil rights movement played a large part, the women's movement played a large part, and we are reaping those benefits now. And I don't think it has been soon enough.
Another ingredient to consider in the recent popularity explosion of African American women writers and artists is the Oprah factor. Over the last 13 years, Oprah Winfrey has become one of the most beloved, respected, and emulated women in the United States. She is the highest paid person in television, and her talk show ranks among the leaders in syndicated programming. Her philanthropic efforts are legendary, and her attempts to make her program more educational and inspirational have also won her critical acclaim. Winfrey's monthly book club feature has single-handedly turned little-known books into bestsellers. She has been credited with bringing reading back into vogue. But more importantly, Winfrey has helped white Americans, particularly women, feel more accepting of African American women.
Oprah is very powerful, and she has, access to the world. And I think, many people actually transcend race. Is one of the simplest things to transcend, after all,
Winfrey, who co-starred in the film adaptation of Walker's The Color Purple, recently produced and starred in a movie based on Toni Morrison's book, Beloved.
Oprah Winfrey is so popular in our culture because she embodies for people both a kind of mythic black woman figure who is in some ways a mammy figure. And I don't say that in a negative way, but if one would say there were positive aspects to the stereotype of the black woman as nanny, mammy, caretaker, what have you, it's that sense of this person who's opening their heart and sharing, who's coming from the bottom and coming up to the top. And Oprah Winfrey embodies all of those kinds of things. For many white viewers, she is that kind of nurturing black female presence, that the utopic presence. For many black viewers and people of color, she symbolizes, again, that sense that we still live in a nation where you can come from the bottom to the top.
But while Oprah Winfrey may have helped introduce white Americans to Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Terry McMillan, and other African American writers, these women have sustained and broadened their readership on the strength and depth of their words.
Fortunately, the Academy, and this is good for the Academy, is now paying a kind of attention to African American literature that it should have been paying a long time ago. From the time that Alice Walker discovered the grave of Zora Neale Hurston and Their Eyes Were Watching God was introduced into the Academy. Today you see classes in departments of English, departments and programs of women's studies and African American studies, all teaching Their Eyes Were Watching God. Many teach Nella Lawson's Passing, of course Toni Morrison's Canon, and many of the writers. So the Academy is paying attention, and I think they're paying attention because these women write very well, and the Academy should have been paying attention a long time ago, and it's hard to ignore it now given the profusion and given the excellence of the writing.
Although this newfound popularity has provided increased exposure and profits for these writers, it has not tainted the importance of their work or their contributions to literary discussions.
Now, does that mean that I have to do some rehabilitation for my students who say, well, this was on Oprah and, that means mostly white people are reading this book? Well, I say, well, that doesn't necessarily mean that mostly white people are reading this book. It means that Oprah has helped to popularize this book, and the audience for this book is increasingly white. But does that mean that the writer is any less important? Does that mean what the writer has to say is any less valuable? No. It means that the writer is being exposed to a much broader audience.
The mark of a great writer is to tell a story that embodies the human experience. Authors who leave a lasting impression often capture the emotions and struggles most of us have dealt with at some point in our lives. If readers can identify with the main character's dilemma, the race, age, or sex of the author should not matter. Memorable literature allows readers to see their own concerns and challenges through the eyes of others.
Reading Anne Frank's diary and hearing this other young girl talk about her own struggles with her budding sexuality, her anger at her mom, her whole sense of not understanding what's going on in the world around her, that spoke to me, even though there was such a distance between her reality as a Jewish girl from a very well-off family, then persecuted in Holland, and my own experience in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. But that was the beginning of me understanding that telling your own story, telling your personal story, can give you power, can change things, can transform your life.
Many of those reading the more popular African-American women authors are white Americans whose lives seldom intersect with black women, yet they identify and relate to the characters and their struggles.
It's very interesting that we have a culture where today large numbers of people are reading African American literature, and their only experience with African American people is through that literature. Many of the African American scholars critique that because ideally you would want people to read the literature but also to speak to that African American who might be working in that person's office, to have their children playing with the African American children on the playground. I don't think that the literature should be a substitute for personal relationships, that the literature is there and the literature is rich, but there are people who wrote that literature, and that literature is about a community that exists out there, and so that readers should try to know that whole community.
I don't think that it's unusual that people are reaching out to this literature that offers us this expansive sense of who we are. I think it is the answer to the future. It is the answer to war. It is the answer to ending the death that is happening all around the world, in the sense that it is only by coming to know each other in community.
As thought-provoking as most of the African-American literature is, many white readers are still hesitant to strike up a conversation or a friendship with a black woman.
I think that sort of curiosity, that willingness to step across sort of a line that's been there for generations is there, that willingness, that interest, and that curiosity. The downside of it is that you can't learn about some other group of people. You can't learn about another's life, another's experience through a book. You actually have to get up and talk to somebody. So perhaps after reading a few books, a white reader may gain the confidence to use the book to start a conversation with an African-American coworker. But you have to be careful about what people read. If you're reading texts that don't offer a balanced view of African Americans, but offer sort of a jaundiced view of African Americans, then you really haven't learned anything useful about another group of people.
Still, most of these intelligent, soul-searching works have allowed white readers to gain a deeper understanding of their African-American counterparts.
In our culture, we often learn that we are safest with people that are just like ourselves. And we forget that, you know, whenever we talk about the hero's journey, when we think about Joseph Campbell's work around the notion of the hero, there's always a journey, and there's always a journey away from that which is familiar into that which is strange, and you're transformed by the mixing of those two things. And part of our nation's coming to grips with difference and diversity and multiculturalism has been people wanting to embrace that movement out, away from the familiar, to experiences that may not be exactly like your experience, that may have something new to offer you. At the same time, they may have something common. You know, many white women readers write to me and say, you know, I didn't grow up in a black household, but my relationship to my grandmother was very similar to your relationship to Saru and Bone Black. So part of what we see is people learning through these literatures that we're not that different from each other, and also learning from the ways that we are different.
Great literature opens minds and hearts. It also provokes social change in slow, subtle ways. The realization of understanding and acceptance often comes with the passage of time.
I think that when people read our work, like all the white women and men who read The Color Purple, I don't think they read the book and every 5 seconds they thought this is about, you know, black people. I think that at some point they said, damn, this is me, Celia is me. I mean, I've had the most amazing people, men of all kinds, say to me, I'm Celia. You know, she starts out in the book as a 14-year-old black girl from the South who doesn't speak standard English. And yet, you know, in the same way that I could identify with Thomas Hardy's characters when I was a student, they identify, you know, and I mean, I didn't think every second, well, God, Thomas Hardy is a white man, he's writing about these white English people. You know, they're separate. It doesn't work like that at all. I mean, if it's really art, it works on the heart. And so, you know, I think you immediately transcend something like race.
Certainly, people read African American literature and enjoy the particular works and then draw a line in their own lives that let this life and this community stay within this work, but do not let it penetrate my life. I think that a person in that situation should examine why they are reading the literature, because I think that the literature is powerful enough to ask certain hard questions and to be transformative and to be redemptive. That if the person is reading the works and reading those works carefully, I think those works will make that person uncomfortable if the person wants to keep this distance from African American people. I would think that would be hard because the works themselves critique that particular kind of posture.
The quality and abundance of literature written by African American women has also profoundly touched the lives of those who share the same skin color.
Having an opportunity to see yourself reflected in an intelligent, compassionate, and artful way on the pages of a book that you know is being read by millions of people out there, as the numbers on Amazon.com let you know, is affirming in some very important ways. Not only do you see yourself, but you see evidence of intellectual activity, artistic activity that is not demeaning, but edifying. And so I think on a lot of levels, the impact on African American women who are readers and consumers of these texts is actually quite profound and important.
While the issues raised and examined by these works often transcend race, some elements identify the literature as uniquely African American.
I think that there are some themes that have been very close to the hearts and minds of African American women. What these writers do with the beauty aesthetic, for instance, I think is distinctly African American. Certainly as they write about characters who have had problems with things such as skin color or hair texture and everything, women at large can identify with that, but I think they place little codes in their literature that African American audiences will particularly pay special attention to. For instance, in talking about hair, they use words like kitchen and edges, and these words are very peculiar to the African American women's experience, and yet they write about these issues in such a way that others outside of that experience can translate it into their own experience.
While white America has embraced many African American women writers and artists, many readers are more hesitant to pick up a book by an African American male.
We have still floating around in our culture this idea that African American women are just kinder, gentler people, almost mammy-like. That idea has not disappeared. I don't care how many pearl necklaces and pearl earrings you put on that image of Aunt Jemima on the syrup bottle. You can't pretty up an old idea like that. And it still has some currency in our culture. So it makes African American women perhaps seem a little more approachable. African American men are just as approachable, but perhaps our cultures focus nightly on the news, on the criminality of African American men, and maybe that myth of their pathology makes us think that as writers they will be cruel or unkind to whites.
Although racial barriers and tensions certainly still exist in the United States, reading works by African American authors helps promote a deeper level of understanding between people of different backgrounds.
One of the major problems with our culture in terms of people getting to know and love people who are different from themselves, different in race or class, is our real estate world and the way we actually live in communities remains very segregated. I think that is why books and mass media have played such a role in bringing that which is different into people's lives, because the neighborhoods that we live in often tend to be much more homogeneous, much more people living with and among people who are like themselves.
I think that the literature does indeed break down barriers. When I look at the fact that I have students coming from all over the world to do MA thesis, doctoral dissertations, honors projects in African American literature. I've had students coming from several from Germany, students coming from the Philippines, students coming from Turkey, a present student from Greece. They're reading the literature. They believe in the power of the literature, and I think that the literature is strong enough such that it can break a lot of barriers, because you read the literature and you realize that, well, these are humans just like these other groups are humans, and so these are humans too. And you have that wide range of human experience.
I grew up in an agricultural part of the world where I was very close to nature, and even now I have gardens all around me. Well, if you are a gardener, race is simple, because you can see, just looking at any flower, that there are all kinds of flowers. You wouldn't say that one is superior to the other. You would say that they're different.
African American women have written complicated stories of love and betrayal, freedom and oppression, joy and pain, victory and hardship. They have shared their insights on facing adversity, coping with motherhood, being resourceful. Like all writers, they speak from their own knowledge and experience. They write with passion, conviction, honesty, and soul. Perhaps the reason why many African American women are capturing the attention of mainstream America is because they have a lot to say.
The writers that people have chosen to read are people who are broadening our sense of how to live and be in the world, of our interconnections, and I think that that isn't necessarily because they are black, because there are other black writers who aren't writing those things, and they're not popular. It's because they bring a particular vision about what our lives might be like.